You have no idea what Persian concubines were capable of. When a man was near, they don't undress. They don't ask. They just look, and suddenly you don't know who you are or what you want. They move, and you forget how to breathe. They vanish, and your hands are left trembling. In this video, you'll discover how one woman could bring a man to his limit. How they taught fingers to speak, lips to stay silent, and the body to take control. No legends. Only rituals. Only heat. Only what happened behind the walls of Persian chambers. Are you ready? Because there's no turning back. Hold on, if you can. Persian concubines were trained to appear as if the room itself had invited them. Their arrival did not announce, it suggested. And even those who waited for them found themselves unprepared the moment it happened. She didn't walk in, she materialized. Like warm smoke that knows no walls. Like a breeze that slips through silence, not to be heard, but to be felt on bare skin. There was no sound. But the tension rose. Her silence held more weight than any speech. Because her silence wasn't passive, it was deliberate. It didn't ask to be noticed. It simply occupied space. Fully. When a man saw her, something subtle shifted. The light seemed warmer. The air, slower. His focus narrowed to her figure, not because he chose to, but because his senses surrendered. She moved in a way that rewrote the tempo of the room. Every step was unhurried, without pause. Not a walk, a glide. What she wore wasn't clothing. It was presence woven into fabric. The silk followed her body like it belonged to her skin. It didn't hide. It highlighted. With every movement, it hinted, not revealed. But just enough for the eye to ask, what did I just miss? She turned, and the cloth shifted. Gently. Obediently. The folds knew where to cling, where to fall, where to invite attention, and then retreat. The man watched. Helplessly attentive. He didn't blink. He didn't think. He waited, without knowing for what. And in that waiting, she became everything. Without touching. Without speaking. She had already become the center of his breath. The Persian concubine had no need for words. Not because she had nothing to say, but because her gaze spoke more than any language could allow. There was no question in her eyes. Only choice. She didn't seek approval, she decided who was worthy of being noticed. From the first glance, a man understood, this was not just a beautiful woman before him. Before him stood a figure whose silence was louder than a scream, whose stillness was stronger than action. The concubine's gaze was never direct, it was calculated. It didn't catch, it invited. It didn't cling, it waited for you to approach on your own. And when a man met her eyes, he didn't feel excitement. He felt uncertainty. Because she saw more in him than he wished to reveal. She held her gaze just a little longer than was considered safe. And with each moment, a strange feeling grew within him, that she already knew he would yield. The only question was, when? A woman like her didn't flirt. She looked. And with that look, she awakened in a man that part which usually sleeps, an unconscious longing to be chosen. Not to possess, but to belong. The concubine's eyes were a weapon not because they were bright, but because they held a pause. That very pause that makes you feel warm, even if the room is cool. The one after which you suddenly realize, her gaze has stayed inside you. And it has no intention of leaving. The concubine's clothing was never random. It wasn't a wardrobe. It was a language. Soft, visual, insistent without sound. Silk was chosen not for its color, but for how it reacted to the body. It had to glide, not rest. It didn't conceal forms, it teased with movement. And therein lay the entire philosophy of the attire. To show not what was there, but what a man wanted to imagine for himself. The fabric wasn't fastened where it was customary. Sometimes it began at the curve of the collarbone. Sometimes it hung by a single finger, a ribbon, or a chain. Sometimes, by nothing at all. And an illusion was created. It stayed in place because she willed it so. With each step, the fabric didn't embrace the body, it slipped away. It didn't fall downward, it unfurled to the side. Every movement compelled you to look more and more. A man caught how she turned, how she leaned, and each time he thought, just a little more, and. But that "and" never came. Because it was a performance where disappointment was impossible, and completion always in question. Sometimes the entire outfit consisted of a single long scarf. Sometimes, of several thin ribbons woven together. The ornaments were part of the fabric, and the fabric part of the skin. And a man stopped seeing the clothing. He began to see how she moved. And thus, he began to wait. For what she would do with that fabric next. For what she would reveal, even if she revealed nothing. Because the main purpose of such attire was not to display the body, but to ignite the imagination, and to keep it in suspense until the final frame. The Persian concubine didn't merely tend to her body. She turned it into a symbol, a message, a memory. Everything that touched her skin was a ritual taught over years. Oils, powders, petals, smoke. They didn't decorate. They absorbed. They became part of the skin. Part of the scent. Part of the movement. Each morning began not with waking, but with an offering to the body. Baths of rose infusion. Slow, circular rubs of warm oil into the wrists, the neck, behind the ears, into the places where the pulse beats. The skin didn't just shine, it breathed fragrance. Not loudly. Not overtly. Only when you came closer than you should. No perfume. Only natural traces, amber, musk, pomegranate. They shifted throughout the day. And a man could feel, in the morning, she was one. In the evening, entirely another. But always, recognizable. The body was treated so that touching it didn't provoke thoughts, it provoked a reaction. Tenderness, in the texture of the skin. Warmth, in the curves. Scent, in the spots where the clothing barely grazed. But the main thing, all this was done not for beauty, but for remembrance. A man could forget words, images, voices. But he never forgot the touch of skin that smelled of amber, whose surface was like a petal, and which left behind not a trace, but a sensation that you were still beside her, even if she had already gone. Contact with a man was never direct. It was controlled. Not obligatory, but unforgettable. The Persian concubine knew, the strongest impact wasn't in the act of touching, but in where and how it happened. She could adjust a man's belt, slowly, with lingering fingers. As if the fabric mattered. As if the touch were accidental. But it wasn't accidental. She handed him a cup not directly into his hands, but in a way that their fingers brushed. For half a second. With the lightest pressure. And they withdrew at the same time, leaving a tension in the air, as if a current had been interrupted in that fleeting moment. Her hand might, accidentally, graze his shoulder as she passed by. And the man felt that touch within himself long after. He began to wonder where else she might touch him. And, most importantly, why she had done it. Because everything in her body said, I control the moment. I decide when it happens. And you will remember it, even if it never happens again. She could trace her fingers along his elbow, or let her hand linger on his palm, just to help him stand. But there was so much tact in that touch that even the most rational men forgot why they had come there. These women didn't touch, they activated. Their touch wasn't a gesture, it was a signal, after which a man ceased to be a mere observer and became a participant. The Eastern dance performed by the concubine wasn't a performance. It was a message. Encoded. Slow. Understood only by those who watched more closely than was permitted. She didn't dance, she conducted a silent conversation. Every movement of her hands, every soft glide of her wrist, every turn of her neck, it was a word. A word addressed not to the crowd, but to one. The man sat, holding his breath. Because his body was already responding, even before he understood what was happening. He didn't just watch. He absorbed. The rhythm wasn't set by music, but by her breathing. Her hips moved not quickly, not sharply, but like a wave that wasn't in a hurry to reach the shore. Her belly lived its own life, it vibrated, rolled, as if an inner fire burned within, restrained only by her skin. Her feet didn't lift, they glided. Her fingers reached into the space, as if inviting, but promising nothing. She was unattainable. And therein lay the dance's greatest strength. The belt with coins didn't jingle for the sake of the music. It accentuated her movements. A man could close his eyes, and still hear where she was, in what position, how exactly her body moved. He heard the dance, and realized he was losing himself in it. The essence of this dance wasn't in what she revealed, but in what she withheld. The dance didn't unveil her, it left only hints, only fragments. As if each movement brought him closer to the answer, yet pushed it further away at the same time. And the man no longer knew whether he wanted to keep watching, or feared he wouldn't be able to stop. The concubine's smile didn't arise by chance. It wasn't a reflection of her mood, nor an ornament on her face. It was a tool. Precise, measured, almost clinical in its effect. It wasn't the kind of smile given to everyone. Nor one that appeared quickly and vanished just as fast. Her smile unfolded slowly, beginning not with her lips, but with her breath. She looked. She remained silent. And when the man began to feel like an object, she slightly lifted the corners of her mouth. Not in mockery. Not in pleasure. But as if she had understood something. About him. About how he was looking at her now. About how deeply he was already ensnared in her game. That smile didn't beckon, it stated. It seemed to say, I already know what you felt. And you know it too. She might not look directly. She might smile as she passed by. She might smile without meeting his gaze. But that soft, curved line on her face left a mark in the man. He didn't know exactly what she meant. But he wanted to find out. He wanted to see it again. He wanted her, once more, to smile just for him. And that was the key. She didn't impose herself. She left something behind. Like a scent that lingers after a person, when you step into a room where they no longer stand. And the man understood, even if she didn't utter a word, he would remember how she looked at him. And how, in that moment, faintly, almost imperceptibly, she smiled. She knew how to leave in a way that others couldn't even enter. Her disappearance wasn't abrupt. She didn't abandon the room, she seemed to dissolve into it. Like vapor, like morning light, like a feeling you suddenly catch, and realize it's no longer there. Yet, at the same time, it was still with you. She didn't speak farewell words. She didn't turn back. She simply vanished from sight, but not from perception. The man was left alone. But the silence around him wasn't empty. It was filled. With that very fabric she had just glided through. With that scent lingering in the air, as if it brushed against his skin. with that sensation that her fingers were just a moment away from closing around his wrist again. He closed his eyes, and saw how she turned her head, how she adjusted an ornament at her temple, how she passed by him. Slowly. Softly. As if she didn't even notice what she was doing to his breath. Her voice didn't sound. But he heard in his mind how she might have said his name. He didn't know why she had to leave. But he knew for certain that now everything he did after her. And this, after, became his new reality. She was gone. But he still felt her. In his palms. On his lips. In thoughts that no longer obeyed logic. She wasn't a presence. She was an echo, one that didn't fade. It was impossible to describe her. Not because there weren't enough words, but because any words were too coarse. She wasn't merely beautiful. She wasn't merely trained. She wasn't merely desired. She was art. Living, breathing, warm. The kind that doesn't hang on a wall, but sits closer. Looks. And ensures you're no longer the same person you were a minute ago. There was nothing random in her body. Every curve, knowledge. Every movement, a conclusion. Every glance, a choice. She knew how to be near. And yet, out of reach. She allowed you to approach, but not to come close. To feel, but not to possess. To desire, but not to be satisfied. Men remembered her. Through years. Through the bodies of other women. Through countries. Because no one could replicate what she did effortlessly. She didn't conquer. She didn't subdue. She simply was. And that was enough for a man to never forget her, nor himself beside her.